Okay, so welcome everyone to Unlocking Nature this evening. Unlocking Nature is an initiative of the NGO Leadership for Conservation in Africa. Unlocking Nature creates a community of conservation passionate people, including those who do and those who will positively influence conservation. Unlocking Nature is the virtual campfire where we tell the African conservation story. Hello, I'm Kirsten Necker, and I will be your host tonight for another informative and inspiring session of Unlocking Nature. And now for tonight's event. Tonight we will look at other approaches and interventions. Our speakers are Dr. Audrey Delsink. She will introduce us to elephant immunocontraception, whilst Grant Fowlds will talk to us about increasing the space available for elephants whilst enabling human-elephant coexistence. Up first, Dr. Audrey Delsink, a passionate voice for elephant conservation. As Executive Director of the not-for-profit Humane World for Animals, Audrey leads efforts to protect wildlife and promote humane approaches to population control. With over 2 decades of hands-on experience in the field, she's a pioneering force in elephant conservation. Since 2000, she served as the field director for the African Elephant Immunocontraception Program, contributing to national policy development. As Audrey writes, the elephant management conundrum continues with renewed calls for culling in many protected areas. As South Africa undertakes a critical review of its biodiversity laws and frameworks, science, ethics, and good governance must remain central to shaping future elephant conservation policy. And it is with this that I hand over to Audrey. Audrey, go ahead. We're all ears.
Thank you, Kirsten, and good evening, everybody. Thank you to LCA and to Share Screen Africa for the opportunity. I've been looking forward to this, although I am a bit nervous. And I see lots of fellow colleagues here, so greetings to you all. Okay, so first of all, just a quick correction. I was the former executive director, but I'm now the senior wildlife director for Humane World for Animals, as we are now known. We were formerly Humane Society International Africa, and that change happened earlier this year. So as an organization, we are committed to comprehensive, sustainable solutions in global animal welfare, and we do this through driving change through human action. As we know, people and elephants across Africa face pressure from growing human-wildlife conflict, and landscapes are shrinking and resources are becoming scarcer. And this forces elephants into ever smaller, fragmented, protected areas. In solving one of the root causes and consequences in these enclosed spaces, and that is elephant population growth, Humane World has supported and funded humane elephant population management through immunocontraception since 1996. By preventing elephant births in targeted areas, immunocontraception reduces pressures on habitats and protects elephants from lethal control. It is an important mechanism to reduce local elephant population densities in the medium to the long term. Today, there is an acknowledgement of the ecological, cultural, and economic significance of elephants in our country, but there's also a diversity of views regarding how these elephants should be managed. For many decades, elephant population management relied heavily on highly invasive and sometimes traumatic interventions, most notably culling and the translocation of orphan groups. These methods were seen as necessary tools for balancing ecology and specifically to absolute numbers of elephants in increasingly fragmented landscapes. Now, there is a wealth of peer-reviewed literature that details the lessons that we've learned from such interventions that had cross-species consequences. For example, the Pilanesberg elephant induced rhino deaths that were due to a lack of dominant and mature bulls. And this was by Gus van Dijk and Prof. Slotto. And other researchers also demonstrated that repeated family losses and chronic and persistent trauma from poaching and culls has decade-long consequences. And this is through Bradshaw and Shannon et al., 2005 and 2013, respectively. In 2008, the norms and standards incorporated immunocontraception into its policy, and this was a guideline to manage elephants based on ecological specificity, tourist guidelines, and human-wildlife conflict. Humane World for Animals, Africa, and the University of Pretoria's Veterinary Population Wildlife Management Laboratories work in immunocontraception is built on over 25 years of published research and policy development. And this cements this methodology as an ethical and scientifically defensible population management tool that actually mimics natural episodic events. Now, as South Africa reviews its biodiversity laws and frameworks for our protected areas, science, ethics, and good governance must all be part of our future elephant management strategies. So, of course, we all know that elephants are politely referred to as system engineers. They are capable of changing landscapes. And about a third of the country's elephants are in fenced or enclosed private or community-owned reserves, comprising of multiple stakeholders and land uses directed by diverse reserve management objectives. Now, within these reserves, we can experience eruptive growth rate. Eruptive growth is a period of extended rapid density independent growth. And one of the things that we've seen certainly is that elephant populations do have the capacity to double every 10 to 15 years. And as we've seen, South Africa law requires that elephants are managed under NEMA and the norms and standards of South Africa. Now, why the need for immunocontraception? Well, translocation options have been largely exhausted, and there has been concern over long-term consequences and the efficacy of culling, and therefore other management interventions and methods were necessary. And so for 40 years, the native pork kind Zona pellucida, which I'm going to refer to as PZP from here on out, this vaccine has been successfully used for immunocontraception in wild horses and white-tailed deer, most specifically in the US, but it's also shown its efficacy in more than 100 other zoo species. PZP's classification as an ideal fertility agent renders it a safe, reversible, and easy to administer, target-specific, and cost-effective vaccine that is free from side effects, as it is a non-hormonal and non-steroidal methodology that is not known to cause behavioral and other complex side effects. So, when I explain how it works, bear with me as I take you back to sort of biology 101. Every mammalian egg cell has a non-cellular layer that surrounds it called the zona pellucida. And this ZP consists of glycoproteins, which include sperm receptor sites. And in nature, what happens is that the sperm must first bind to these receptor sites, and then he penetrates the egg, and then he can fertilize it. But however, when you administer the PZP, so P being porcine because it's derived from pig's eggs, and when you inject it into the target elephant's muscle, it actually creates a immune response which stimulates antibodies against the proteins in the vaccine. These antibodies attach to the sperm receptors on the ZP of the elephant's egg, and therefore they block fertilization because the sperm cannot bind to the egg. And that's why you have a very confused looking little sperm in the picture there. And there is no cross-reactivity with any other organs, tissues, or molecules in the elephant's body. So this is very specific to the zona pellucida of the elephant's egg. So in explaining and trying to give you an idea of how the immunocontraception actually works, I'm going to play this video if it allows me. There we go. And so basically what we do, let me see if I can turn this down, is we prepare the darts, which is the dropout dart. We then locate the elephants by means of a helicopter or a fixed wing. And then we actually age and sex the animals on a very broad-based scale. And this is done by very experienced personnel. The vaccination is done of target females that are aged 10 years and up, and this is specifically so that we know that those females have had their first calves, because this is important for the social well-being of the individual as well as for the herd itself, and of course to try to maintain the demographic of the herd. How it works is we give the animal a primary and a booster in the first year, and this is to build the antibody titers up. And then we give them a single annual booster thereafter. It's important to note that this vaccine does not affect pregnancies in progress. And so that's why there is a bit of a lag effect, because it takes, those animals that are pregnant will go ahead and calve and have their first calves before they become contraceptive. Oops. Okay, so in demonstrating how the effect of the vaccine on population growth, I just wanted to bring your attention to the Greater Makalali Private Game Reserve. And this is a population that has been treated. In fact, it's the benchmark population, and it has been started in the year 2000. And I worked and lived on this reserve, had the privilege of being there for 20 of those years. Now, on the x-axis, you have the number of elephants. On the y-axis, you have the number of years of treatment. And the blue blocked line is the population without immunocontraceptive intervention, including what we knew to be the intercalving intervals for that particular reserve. And note that it would have peaked at approximately 238 elephants. The red dotted line is the population under PZP treatment, but allowing for first-time mothers to calve and accounting for reversibility, and then this population estimation is at about 94 elephants, and it's actually much lower than that if you look at the actual numbers on the reserve currently. Nonetheless, the net effect of the contraception has been approximately 150 elephants that have been prevented from being born on this particular reserve, which is 20,000 hectares, which, as you can see, is a massive cumulative effect over time and space. So in terms of a summary of the stats, the immune contraception, as I said, was initiated first at Makalali Private Game Reserve in the year 2000 to test its efficacy as a population control mechanism. We currently have 45 reserves that are on treatment, with more reserves joining every year, and 52 reserves have been treated historically, and so a number of reserves have actually taken themselves off to allow their populations to reverse and to allow for growth to occur. We currently have about 1,700 breeding females that are on the treatment, and this is outside the Kruger National Park, so predominantly in private community and other provincial, although we do have a national park. And this totals more or less 6,500 elephants in total for the whole population. And it does actually include one reserve that is actually open to the Kruger National Park, so it is part of that open system. So in terms of the number of years of treatment for the different reserves, we have 8 reserves that are now spanning the 15 to 25-year mark. And we have 18 reserves that have been going for 10 years or more. So as you can see, there's a wealth of reserves from coast to coast across South Africa that have been undergoing treatment for a number of years. And so in terms of due diligence and observations, monitoring in terms of demographics and efficacy, I think you can see that the numbers speak for themselves. We have seen reversibility, and this has been demonstrated to the birth of calves, and there are ongoing hormonal studies at various reserves to test follicular occurrences and the like. So as I mentioned, Makalali is our benchmark study. It has been prevented from doubling twice. We have 2 new African range states that will be included, hopefully one still this year, and another 2 or 3 sites in another venue, another range state next year. And we have ongoing research with the University of Victoria, the Veterinary Population Management Laboratory, our own organization, and of course, other organizations. And so, in summary, immunocontraception allows for the reduction or the prevention of calving for indefinite or for defined periods, and it can be compared to extended intercalving intervals experienced as a result of episodic natural catastrophes such as droughts. So this happens naturally where the intercalving intervals are lengthened, and we've seen this in areas such as Kenya, where we've seen intercalving intervals as high as 14 years. Contraception as a predefined proportion of breeding females will allow cohorts of births to occur, and this simulates natural gaps in recruitment in more natural low resource conditions. Immunocontraception will allow the elephants to occupy the same space, but at a lower overall number over time, and therefore acting as a long or medium to long-term mitigation tool. So females that are not pregnant at the first time of treatment, as I indicated, are immediately contracepted, and those that are not will carry to term, as the vaccine does not affect pregnancies in progress. And so larger populations simply need to be scaled up as a number in terms of the resources. And so what I neglected to say is that we currently have, of those 45 reserves, the largest, which is close on 96,000 hectares, and just over 500 elephants on treatment at that particular reserve. Okay, so one of the most persistent dilemmas that we see in conservation biology today is the tension between population level outcomes and individual well-being. And this is particularly pronounced in elephant management, where interventions like culling and translocation may benefit ecosystems or human interests, but they compromise the welfare of individuals. So we know that populations are the sum of the individuals, and they depend on the availability of other members to persist over time. And so unfortunately, the current framing of today's narrative certainly promotes an either-or approach, or simply negates well-being, resulting in polarization and conflict. We know that there's certainly that position when it comes to elephants. So Kophamel and Duval demonstrate that actually data that is collected through physiological, morphological, nutritional, and behavioral wildlife health assessments, which are all indicators of an animal's well-being, help identify populations that are at risk of starvation, disease, and decline from anthropogenic impacts on natural habitat. So we suggest advocating for a position that prioritizes animal welfare alongside population and ecosystem level goals, enhancing human welfare through the provision of ecosystem services, and ultimately in a one health, one welfare component. From there. Okay, so now when we look at what happens to what we see in the law, we know that there is a wide body of legislation, and this is framed by the Constitution as an overarching piece. And there are concurrent mandates with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and the Department of Agriculture. And of course, this also encompasses the other pieces of NEMA, NEMA, and the Animal Protection Act. Okay, however, the draft National Environmental Biodiversity Bill, which seeks to replace the existing National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, signals a pivotal shift in the environmental governance of biodiversity in South Africa. And specifically, Clause 40 of the Biodiversity Bill provides the Minister with the power to list species and ecosystems which are threatened, and the need of conservation or protection, and requiring careful consideration and promotion with access to traditional, cultural, spiritual use, and specifically that require additional consideration to promote animal well-being of individuals or populations, and humane practices, actions, and activities. So the historical emphasis on consumptive use straddles a more nuanced consideration of sentience, suffering, and the moral responsibility, though clarity is still needed regarding the actual implementation of this biodiversity pool, particularly regarding which species qualify for enhanced protections, etc. So that brings us to the duty of care, and the concept of the duty of care in biodiversity also represents a transformative legal and ethical development. No longer can management interventions be justified solely through population level metrics, and that's important. It's not just about the numbers anymore. There is now an expectation to consider the well-being of individuals and species as part of a moral and legal obligation. Care ethics shift the conversation from dominion and control to stewardship and coexistence. In practice, this may require changes to how permits are viewed and issued, but also how the interventions are justified. It also demands a rethinking of accountability frameworks. Who is responsible when well-being is compromised? How are the unintended consequences mitigated or redressed? The duty of care challenges us to move beyond minimal compliance and to embody an ethic of responsibility that is rooted in compassion, science, and justice. So in previous work, we have demonstrated that management must be biologically relevant to the species. And so consequently, elephant management must reflect the species' unique spatial, social, and reproductive needs. New guidelines for metapopulation management for lions, cheetah, and elephant consider confined versus large populations and suggest lethal and non-lethal actions at an individual or a pride or a coalition or herd level. And this is in order to affect population level demographics. This is likely to have behavioral consequences and others for highly socially bonded animals such as elephants. And this is especially true when proposals to remove individual young females from multiple herds to affect growth and demographics, and managing elephants in space and time through a combination of fear landscapes and lethal population growth. So the impact of continued lethal removals of youngsters over time will likely have long-term severe behavioral consequences and impacts on, for example, tourism products. So in the case of elephant population management, the duty of care means more than simply avoiding harm. It implies proactive responsibility, employing the least intrusive methods and monitoring for stress or side effects, all of which have been done over the last 25 years for immunocontraception. Unlike surgical sterilization or population reduction through lethal means, immunocontraception allows for the maintenance of a natural social structure when correctly implemented, but it results in a reduced or a stabilized growth rate whilst leaving elephants in the system. The draft biodiversity bill opens an important space for such interventions by recognizing non-lethal, non-invasive methods as legitimate management strategies, particularly in conflict mitigation and prevention. One of the outputs of the DFFE Sandby Elephant Heritage Strategy Commission projects, which was the risks associated with the unintended consequences of elephant management interventions, was a publication by Van der Water et al. In 2022. And this publication included a well-being assessment to holistically measure the consequences of 12 elephant management interventions at different scales of animal welfare and benefits, as well as the impact on animal, human, and environmental well-being. These were further then divided into subcategories, and therefore this expanded on the one welfare concept. Importantly, immunocontraception ranked highest on the one well-being score, and it ranked lowest on the interference rank for the direct management interventions. And this is important when comparing them to other methodologies such as culling, etc. So over the last few weeks, there's been much talk and misperception of the disruption and unknown consequences of immunocontraception, despite the 12 years of published study on the lack of behavioral consequences of the Greater Makalali Reserve, which study is still ongoing, and which has also been supported by an independent shorter study by Druce et al. At Pindamuniwana. Now, while some have used rationality and proportionality tests to compare culling and contraception, we should also be comparing apples with apples and specifically looking at the holistic management strategies and objectives of the reserves, as well as the methods themselves. Van Aarde et al. In 1999 stated that culling becomes self-reinforcing as it moves population densities towards the level where reproduction is greatest. As such, the level of effort required to maintain that population at the required level is persistent and substantial. Regarding his paper entitled Effects of Social Disruption in Elephants Persist Decades After Culling, Dr. Graham Shannon stated that conserving these elephant populations is more than just a numbers game. It is also essential that complex social function is maintained and this is a crucial aspect of elephant biology and population integrity. So, whilst immunocontraception does not immediately reduce overall population numbers, it does cause aging in the population and a reduced or stabilized growth rate with much less effort required. As managers and conservationists, policymakers, and the public, we can either double down on extractive, lethal, instrumental models of wildlife management, such as culling, or we can embrace a future where science, policy, and compassion converge. This means investing in medium to long-term evidence-based solutions like immunocontraception, similarly to the nearly 50 other reserves that have already done so. Every non-pregnant female that we treat with immunocontraception now is prevented from conceiving. And with a cow that can give birth to 8 to 10 calves in her lifetime, the effect of immunocontraception is quite astounding. South Africa has moved away from mass culling in Kruger National Park in 1994, and to readopt this practice would be toppling us, I believe, as conservation leaders, challenging both the duty of care and undoing the conservation grounds that were achieved. So with that, just a short list of the references that I did make reference to in the presentation. And finally, thank you to LCA and Share Screen Africa for affording me the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you to everybody that has joined on this Thursday evening. And a special thank you to all the partner reserves that participated, as well as all the veterinarians and partner organizations that we work with to make this possible. And of course, our partners at the Veterinary Population Management Laboratory. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Really appreciate your talk. Very informative and thought-provoking. The chat box has been going crazy and there are lots of questions, and I'm going to just say that if people would like to ask their question in person, then they're welcome to raise their virtual hand. I can see, Ryan, you have your hand up at the moment. And just for the interests of a participatory conversation, if everybody could just keep their questions to no longer than 2 minutes, that will allow more people to be participating. And also, please just keep your questions and your comments constructive for our for the conversation. So I'm going to first go into the chat because we've had people waiting with questions for quite a long time, and then I'll come back to you, Ryan. So the first question that we had in the chat was from Lion Expose. Does this immunocontraceptive keep the cows in permanent estrus?
No, it doesn't keep them in permanent estrus. What it does is the female continues to cycle as she would normally if she wasn't on treatment. So that's a cycle of every 15 to 16 weeks for 2 to 6 days. And so she's not in a permanent state of estrus. And in fact, the literature has demonstrated that those cycles are actually not like clockwork, as we have been led to believe, and it's more related to resources, so adequate vegetation, food, etc., and rainfall. So I think there's a misperception there because the permanent state of estrus actually referred to previous hormonal studies that were done where there was a hormonal implant that actually did induce permanent states of estrus, but that is a completely separate methodology. It's got nothing to do with what our program does. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. One more chat question. Bruce Dankworth. Audrey, you say it can reduce local population densities. I've only ever seen data where the growth rate has been slowed and not reversed. Would you like to respond to that one?
Sure. So I said it can reduce local population densities in the medium to long term, and that is because it causes an aging of the population. And so you will start to see your population die off as those individuals mature. So I did indicate that it doesn't immediately reduce. There's nothing that would do that other than a translocation or removal of elephants through a cull. And so that's what the immuno does. It actually creates an inversion. So you still have a reduced number of calves coming through, but aging of your population, and therefore it kind of weighs itself out as those elders pass on.
Thanks, Audrey. Okay, Ryan, you're up. Welcome to ask your question.
Thanks so much for the presentation. The question I have for you is, let's for instance take Madikwe, and I hate to bring that up, but it's obviously a concern over in conservation. Let's say you know, as we know, there are way too many elephants in Madikwe, 1,400 according to some scientists. Now let's say we're going to fly the helicopter over a herd of, let's be modest and say 30 elephants, and you're going to dart a few of those females in that herd. How do you know when to go back? How do you know which females you've darted in a year or two when you have to redo the booster? How do you control that? How do you know who you've done and who you haven't?
Okay, so how we do it is we do it on a broad-based age and sex structure, so we don't have to know individual elephants. We've moved away from that. And so basically all we do is we go up and as I said, we do females that are age 10 and above, and that's generally because those females have already had their first calves. So when your objective is to treat your population, obviously we would work hand in hand with the management authority and target the percentage of the population at what they deem to be suitable for their park's long-term objectives. Or if we're going to treat the whole population, then we're doing all breeding females aged 10 and up. And the dart, as I say, leaves a mark on the elephant, and so we can easily see from the air who has been darted. So it's not necessary to know who's who. Also, elephants have a very high affinity to their home range. So even in our large parks, they will stay in that same area, even if there's a seasonal movement, and they come back. And we've seen that in our open reserves. So we come back once a year, and we are able to redo the females at the same time, at the same place each year, more or less.
Okay, sorry, two more questions and I'll be quick. One is that once you've darted these females, that's all fair and well, but that doesn't take away the immediate problem of the numbers. And obviously we all know that translocation's out of the question because nobody wants elephants. So what do you do with the excess? How do you manage that? The contraceptives isn't going to magically make the big number disappear. How is that going to happen?
No, it's not. And that's the point, is the contraceptive is a proactive strategy. But many reserves have adopted that. And the reason that we have a contraceptive projection is because we work into the plan to see, you know, what the population looks like, and we project, you know, the long-term outcomes for that population so that we can monitor accordingly. So of course, that's where one of the positive things of the meta-population strategy is that it will afford opportunities for movement of animals between different reserves, particularly bulls, etc. So there are other strategies that can adopt and allow for movement besides translocation, so corridors, transfrontier parks, etc., and such things. Because if a reserve is deemed that it's over its carrying capacities, there's nothing that can be done other than to remove elephants.
Yeah, I understand. It's a major concern because there's nowhere to remove them to. The question is, why is the elephant still classified as endangered on the red list of IUCN when we're using contraceptives?
So the reason that we're using contraceptives in South Africa specifically is because our populations are enclosed. And so within enclosed populations, we see these massive growth rates. So we have forced them into these fragmented, enclosed populations where they can't move. And so natural processes such as immigration cannot occur. So when you enclose them and then you bombard them with artificial water holes, and then you don't manage holistically by rotational water plans and fire plans, and you don't manage your herbivores assemblages properly, then you have to take all of that into account, and you have to manage your elephants in one form or another. And so that is why, although it does sound like a conundrum, we are contracepting an endangered species, because the alternatives are what? To either kill them or to treat them and keep them in the population and allow for reversibility at a later stage if that opens it up for himself. But we are in a unique situation where we do have fenced populations that has stem for that.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks, Audrey.
Sure. Thanks,
Yeah,
Ryan.
thank you, Ryan. Okay, super. Robert, I can see your hand up. You've been waiting patiently, so go ahead.
No, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for putting on this amazing dialogue. Audrey, thank you so much for an enlightening presentation. That was really good. My question very simply comes down to the data that you have on costs. You've been implementing this for almost 20 years. What is, from a data perspective, the cost of immunocontraception, maybe per elephant or per herd of elephants that you do on an annual basis? Do you have something like that locked in?
Yeah, sure. So the greatest cost is actually in the use of the helicopter. So obviously the more elephants that you do, the cheaper it becomes, because it gets watered down amongst those different, amongst the elephants. So we work on an average of about probably between 2,000 and 2,500 Rand per elephant, but that is including your vaccine and your dart and your chopper time. So yeah, that's a very rough estimation, and that's when when we implement, etc. So in terms of an overall strategy of a per elephant basis, considering that the major expense is the helicopter, it's quite cost effective.
Appreciate that. You also use Makalele as your example. Do you have, based on the data, again, of all the reserves that you work on, have you seen certain reserves with certain population numbers that seem to do very well, respond very well from a proactive immunocontraception program versus others, especially from like a starting population size?
Well, first of all, the vaccine has a very high efficacy. So, I mean, remember, this is based on an animal's immunity. So we say that there should be a 95% efficacy, because clearly there are some animals that may not have an immune response. Having said that, however, we have seen an almost 100% efficacy in all our populations. In terms of the impact, it very much depends on the percentage of animals that are treated. So there are certain reserves that we have recommended do a higher number of elephants, females, and the reserve hasn't adopted that strategy. And so there we see a lower impact on their growth rate as a result, because they didn't, they had a different objective in mind, and perhaps they only wanted to do a certain percentage, etc. So I think overall it depends. This is the beauty of this methodology. It can be tailor-made and unique to the I need some coffee. The specificity of the reserve's objectives. But in general, we have seen that when we do all the breeding females for initially, we start to see that 0% growth rate by year 3, and thereafter we work to stabilize and maintain that population. So that's generally the principle. Sure.
Thank you, Audrey. Thanks, Robert, for your questions. Brandon, I do see your hand up. I'm a little bit in a quandary, because we have a lot of questions from the chat, and also we need to move on to our next speaker. So what we're going to do is questions in the chat will be answered, hopefully by Audrey, if she can get to them. Audrey, is that okay for you to do some answering in the chat?
Sure.
And then what we will do is we will also have a question and answer period after Grant's talk. And if there's space, then you can still ask your questions to Audrey then as well. So yeah, thanks Audrey for staying in. And I'd now like to turn to Grant. Grant, are you there? I see you. Fantastic.
Yes.
Our second speaker for this evening is Grant Fowlds, a frontline conservationist with a particular love for elephants and rhinos. He is the author of Saving the Last Rhinos and Rewilding Africa. His life mission spans rewilding, environmental education, and humanitarian work across Africa. A co-founder of South Africa's renowned Amakhala Game Reserve and director at Project Rhino, Grant has pioneered groundbreaking wildlife initiatives, from relocating elephants and mitigating human-wildlife conflict to launching youth art education projects that reach across language and borders. Grant's talk is titled The Dilemma of Elephants and Communities. Please note, just a little note, that there are a couple of images that may be disturbing for very sensitive viewers. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to invite Grant to share his experience and expertise with us this evening. Grant, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kirsten. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this online presentation. I'm going to be a lot quicker than Audrey, and this is my story. And I realize that the people that are maybe on this Zoom have a varied perspective from science and all sorts of other methods. So I'm going to try and keep it as to another perspective of the dilemma and community, and roughly speak about everywhere that I've been to in Africa, obviously specific to two perspectives. One is the South African context, which is in the fence system, and the other one is where the rest of Africa are all elephants that are transnational, basically. And that fact is that anyone can Google. So I know a lot of this information will be stating the obvious, but I think we need to be reminded on how complex this issue is of human-wildlife conflict, especially within communities. I'll try and be as unbiased as possible, because I do believe communities have got a real perspective on elephants. Obviously, human-wildlife conflict, the acronym is HWC, and throughout Africa, we are seeing many, many more incidences of human-wildlife conflict as people get closer, populations on park perimeters expand, the rural villages are sprawling. We have a lot of failed land claims in Southern Africa, which I will get to, because I believe that some of them could be corridors. We also, as was alluded to, we have a closed fence system, unlike everywhere else in Africa, which is open system. Elephants are owned by the ones that have been approved as an elephant management plan, and the rest of Africa is basically owned by the government system or the communities or the wildlife authority of the park or of that country. We also have problems with snares. People are indiscriminately putting in snares for antelope and other animals, and they are affecting elephants as well. And obviously the smaller reserves with successful elephant populations are outbreeding the size completely. So maybe we are not expanding fast enough, which I'll get to later on. Many of you will know, obviously, what damages there are, and elephants can be a damn nuisance when they are turning over your tanks, pulling up your pipes. If you have reserves, you normally have to put your water pipes under 800 millimeters below the ground. They're getting into crops. As you can see in the picture, they're damaging fences. These are all obvious things. And then we have the human interference, where people, more and more people, as people are getting closer, or game viewers are getting closer to animals, they are there is damage and sometimes death, obviously with a lot of the parks, private and state as well. Mitigation tools. In the picture, there's a beehive you can see hanging in a marula tree. They love marulas because it's a soft tissue tree, and obviously it's sometimes a nesting site for vultures, so the vultures are suffering and so on. Electric fences are not as strong as they should be, so they're pushing them over. The other things that are working pretty well are chili pastes, lights, putting out elephant scouts, and in some cases, when you're building fences, if they're problem elephants, we're putting in tentacles or fence whiskers. I've seen them in Uganda work pretty well in Queen Elizabeth Path, Chayambura, to mitigate elephants moving out of Uganda into community areas. So that is just an example of an offset tentacle fence where elephants cannot get closer to the fence to pull it over. And if the wire is very soft, the softer the wire is, the better, because the elephants learn, or sometimes the problem males learn which pole to pull over and what wire is not shocking properly. So a big result of the human-wildlife conflict is that bad fences make very bad neighbors, and everybody gets irritated, and you have crop damage and all that. Another big thing that we are not doing properly is to educate the people around parks, and it's not that easy. The community, starting with the school children, and then going to the seniors, the chiefs, and all the amakosi, plus the community members, of the value of elephants. I will go into just the problems that the communities are facing in the 10 most asked questions about there's no value in elephants. So one has to look at the value of elephants over a lifetime, and I did look at the Google realistic Google value, and some of them say over 60 years or whatever, they're worth $1.6 million. I realized that would be a whole nother debate and a contentious one, so I just left it like that. But obviously elephants have a massive value in ecotourism. Some have a value in hunting, and obviously others have a value in carbon sequestration and forest maintenance as pathfinders in our natural spaces. So education is very important. Then obviously, people take the law into their own hands if things aren't well, and they kill elephants, or the authorities have to come out and kill the elephants because they are problem causing bulls or females or whatever. So these are just some of the dramatic pictures of elephants. The one on the right is Zimbabwe, and the other one is a Natal one where the elephant cow was full term, and these are just some of the dramatic pictures of human-wildlife conflict. I was years ago with Kingsley Holgate, we launched elephant art into the Congo with the forest elephants. This is the African Parks story that's gone out to depict rhinos, elephants, and a landscape, and to educate people on protecting our wildlife adjacent to parks. Yeah, so yeah, just how beautiful elephants can be in a landscape, and I can't imagine that this endangered or not, I know we have too many, but this mega herbivore that's so vital in our landscape is under threat because there are too many, and parts of the rest of Africa, there are too few. These are just some images of elephants getting into the crops of community members, and one has to be very sorry for them because very often they have you know, this is their livelihood, and people are fearing and scared of elephants, especially at night when they go in and they just wake up in the morning and this is what they see. So just as we see it, obviously monitoring elephants is vital. So one must always know where they are, hopefully, and be able to react with them. So collaring of elephants and knowing their movements is vital. Otherwise, we cannot react and keep people out of harm's way with satellite collars and so on. So I just took some examples of, you know, the community questions or the community concerns that people have had over the years. And right from Central Africa, right through Angola, where I've worked, in Zimbabwe, and right down to home, which is South Africa. And most of the people are saying, we don't see value in elephants, or we'd rather have the meat, or we are scared when we outside, when we go out of our houses at night, or even in the daytime. Elephants are dangerous. Obviously, they are dangerous, but education, again, is a vital tool of it. And maybe if your fences are down, it's obvious that they're going to be a threat to people. Or our children, our kids can't walk to school. They're scared of them. A common one is that big bull is very cheeky. Or the one with the tiny calf is full of nonsense. Or please take them away from our villages. They are of no use to us. So I think, you know, we are all preaching to the converted here, but conservation education is something that we are very lacking in our community conflict, human-wildlife conflict areas. Just going on to the options. These are literally the options that we have available as elephant guardians or owners or parks or whatever. Obviously, we had Audrey's contraception. We have the relocation option, but as you all chirped in the thing, but where do they go? So, you know, I have always advocated corridors right through my walk in Africa. And obviously the last one is culling. So culling is always on the table right now, right throughout smaller parks, as we see in Madikwe or wherever our conflict areas work. But my little 5 cents worth, and I realize that in this Elephant Month, I'm the only man that's not a doctor, or man or presenter that's not a doctor. So I'm not a PhD or anything, but I do believe that we have other options. One of them is this little video, which you may have seen. It's gone viral, but because I think it's amazing what a small group of people can do with very limited money. And please just watch this video. How it's all about elephants and a corridor.
Across Africa, elephants are under pressure. As habitats shrink and resources dwindle, they are often confined to smaller areas, leading to conflict, overpopulation, and stress on the land. But there is another way. By creating wildlife corridors, we can give elephants what they need the most: space. At Amakhala Game Reserve in South Africa's Eastern Cape, a new chapter began with the opening of the Bushman's River Corridor, a natural pathway running beneath the N2 highway, reconnecting two halves of the reserve. Since its opening, we've watched elephants explore new ground, crossing back and forth, giving the land and its life room to recover. Where there is movement, there is freedom. Where there is connectivity, there is resilience. This corridor is more than a passage for wildlife. It is a lifeline. It stitches together habitats, strengthens biodiversity, and allows nature to take the lead once more. It reminds us that conservation is not only about protecting what we see today, but about creating a future where wildlife and people can coexist. When we give space back to nature, life returns. And every step through this corridor is a step toward a wilder, more connected tomorrow.
So taking that example of a simple project, so this is another video in Northern Natal of elephants, just for people to see. It's obvious when they break out of game parks where they have to be herded back like naughty school children. That's actually on the Pongola River. Now, I'm just going to give you some examples of, we have some obvious places in Africa, or Southern Africa, where we can create these parks. Now, it's easier to talk than and show ideas, but things just aren't happening. This is Madikwe on the left, and it's Pilanesberg on the right. And for years, this heritage park has been on the cards, but due to all sorts of things, from politics to political will to all sorts of things, the corridor has not materialized. So there would be a relief valve for elephants, as well as all the other mitigating circumstances. The other option, obviously, is purely just to destroy them, which will certainly happen if this is not going to happen. That Moletedi Dam is an amazing eco space with grasslands equivalent to probably the Botswana swamps. And then you've got all these farms in the Northwest province that could act as a corridor. So that was just one example. So I just thought I'd take that in Northern Natal, right from Ndinini going right through to Pongola. There's a corridor of natural ground that could be used and circulated through over Pongola into Mkuzi and back into Mashabane and into Mozambique. That would be a Natal one. This one would be linking Botswana to Kruger National Park through a narrow corridor in the Waterberg. And I know these are all pipe dreams, but if people worked hectare for hectare towards them, there would be a long-term solution towards prosperity. A lot of them are protected areas already. So I do believe there are some options right here. Right here in the Eastern Cape, or there's the Addo to Great Fish, or Addo to Amatola Mountains. And already we see development of all these reserves merging together. Addo has a big population, has a very successful model of conservation. You've got Shamwari, Pumba, Amakala, Karecha, Buffalo Kloof, Kwandwe, right to Kwandwe to Great Fish, and then into Fort Beaufort, Fort Ice Reserve, etc. So they again, another pipe dream, but on the other side of Addo, you've got Addo to Bavians, through the Bavians Cliff, right towards Knysna. There is work going on there, and north of Addo through Darlington, there's another corridor going right up to the Sneeuwberg to Mountain Zebra Park. So again, I know these are obvious, but if a group of farmers in the Eastern Cape can pull that corridor off, roads and culverts and rivers and everything are actually not as big a mountain as we think they are. So I really think that if there is a will, there's a way. And we're talking about Southern Africa. Already it's happening with elephants migrating into Luingwe, into the Okavango, and north into Angola as civil war has subsided. So again, just lovely to see elephants part of our eco landscape without all these issues that us as humans have actually caused and now have to find a solution for. And we, as undivided or divided as we are in our perceptions, there has to be a solution for these wonderful creatures, mega herbivores. So yeah, just thank you very much for that. When the elephant walks, the earth must listen. So thank you for your time. Thank you to LCA for this opportunity to present. Over and out.
Thank you, Grant. Wonderful. I see a few people have been in the chat just expressing their love for the work that you do. There's Haley, Tandeko, and Gebhardt. They've all expressed appreciation for the work that you're doing. I would like to first invite Sam Ferreira. If you would like to just unmute and give a little bit of comments or input. I saw you had quite a presence in the chat. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, sure, Kirsten. I mean, I've been enjoying the presentations tonight and hearing the various colleagues. Some of them I know very well. And now I think there's been really important ones, but perhaps there are one element that are really important. We tend to go and say we have got a tool, four tools at the moment. And then we start calculating and comparing. We had it on the first night as well on this series on what works better or what is ethically best or what is best for a situation. What I'm not seeing is how do we connect it to actually what we're trying to achieve in a place. So, for example, one can imagine that the objectives of so I think we might unlock a lot of better things for ourselves if we start with what we're trying to achieve at a particular objective. I think Grant's example of the various Eastern Cape ones is good examples, where you have got certain objectives that you're trying to achieve at reserve. I very seldom see how we in a structured way unpack and say, this reserve has got the following objectives. How do elephants influence my ability to achieve that objective or not? And then if one do that, you tend to then potentially unlock a whole range of other responses that you can do, or maybe even different ways in how you use the current tools. For example, if I want to use culling to change activity of elephants, that is a very different set of questions than if I am trying to use culling or any technique to reduce numbers at large scales. So maybe there's some opportunities for us to unpack what we want to achieve and then come back to what is the best way. And I suspect we're actually going to end up with probably a combination of all these kind of tools that we've got available to us, which is required under different circumstances. I hope that it's just a comment. I don't ask any questions. I'm sure the guys who've been following and they can have a look at the questions that's happening on that. But thanks both Audrey and Grant. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Sam, I was just also interested. You mentioned something about two kinds of conflicts, the human-wildlife conflict situation.
Yeah, so I put in a copy of a paper which I thought was very useful. And what we typically see is the first kind of conflict is people that have got different expectations. And I've used the example of rangers and farmers. A farmer enjoys, has got an expectation of good crops, whereas the ranger has got an expectation of really good elephant populations. And quite often we talk past each other because we have got these different expectations. We see it often in the predator conflict space as well. But our responses are normally on the damages that has happened. You will see compensation programs across Africa. South Africa doesn't have a lot of those, etc. Whereas actually, if we do think about those recognizing each other's expectations as conflict, our options in working together, first of all, understanding each other, and then co-developing the responses on how we can actually minimize these sort of things that Grant has talked about. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Okay, super. Ryan, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I'm going to keep my video off because Wi-Fi is not so good, but thanks for the chat, Grant. Just a question about the corridors. Isn't sending elephants into larger areas actually going to exaggerate the numbers? Aren't they going to start growing more when they get into bigger areas? And then also these corridors, I mean, these aren't sheep we're talking about, right? So you're going to have to corridor them off. Otherwise, they're going to stroll into communities and invade and raid crops and all that. How are you going to control the elephants going from one area to the other without having to build a very expensive fence line on either side to herd them, so to speak, into these areas that you want them to go?
Yeah, Ron, good question, but the larger the landscape, the less fences you need. And we've realized now that corridors are not as restricted as we thought they were. They are, if a thing is 100 meters wide, they use it, or if it's 15 meters wide, a culvert, they use it almost daily. So, and I think we're quite aware of the problem. So we're creating more corridors, not to breed more elephants, but to resolve the problem that we have and to increase our tourism potential. That's the way I see it. Exactly what Sam was saying now. We realize what the problems are, and we have to manage those problems. We all have to work towards them with a combination of the contraceptives, the corridors, the bridges, the tunnels, the bigger landscapes, and so on.
Great, thanks. And one last question is, obviously, when you spoke about the means of keeping elephants away from crops and stuff, and as you know, the major problem in Malawi and Zambia, where areas are so remote that there's no way they can get beehives and those kind of things to those people. What do they do? I mean, is trenches an option? I know it involves some manual labor in digging a trench around your little crop of, say, half a hectare or whatever of maize. For those that can't get beehives, can't get chili, all of that, would the trenches be an option as it worked in the past?
As far as I'm concerned, I don't think trenches are the greatest option. I know there's been a lot of human-wildlife conflict in Malawi. So I don't think that is a realistic option at all.
All right. Thanks, Grant. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. Grant, I just see that there's a hand up by Holly Dublin, and Holly, I'm very happy that you've come on now. I see that you had a very valuable comment in the chat, so please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. I have a terrible cold, so apologies for my voice. There's so much that could be said here, but I think that one thing that I'm a bit stunned by is that no one has mentioned whatsoever land use planning. So a lot of these conflicts are being created because we have very conflicted use on the land. The land is what is the shortage. And so we have departments of water, agriculture, infrastructure, development, all those ministries in every one of these countries has a mandate. And those mandates often impact the same land. And remember that those mandates will always be driven by the needs of the citizens of those countries. So if we just continue focusing on, the elephants as an individual thing, and how are we going to handle the elephants, you're never going to get there. I mean, I've worked in all range states of the African elephant for the past 40 plus years. I can tell you that even when there's 2 elephants, you can get conflict. So it's not just a numbers game. I mean, Senegal had this problem for years of their few remaining elephants causing problems locally. The point is that our governments are not working effectively at saying, how do we handle these multi-sectoral needs on the same land? So a lot of those areas that appear to be big open spaces have big plans behind them. I can tell you, I work with these governments. They've got plans for almost all the land. And those plans are just oftentimes waiting for finance to happen, waiting for big donors to come in, whatever they're waiting for. But they do have plans. There's development corridors all across sub-Saharan Africa that we just haven't seen the movement on yet. But if you're working with the governments as I do, you're hearing about it just all the time. And I think that we're kind of going to get in a little bit of a trap of navel gazing if we don't think about those broader issues. And I think the other thing is that, and I put it here in the chat just quickly, is that there just doesn't seem to be, an understanding or a caring almost, that these areas are hugely inhabited by people. And I've been very involved in the Malawi's issue there in Kasungu. And I was recently kind of shocked by a number of maps that I saw going up of this is where, you know, all using all kinds of technology, and yet not one map that overlaid it with how many humans were there. And there are the highest human population densities in Africa there outside of Rwanda. So, you know, I just think we can continue to have these discussions, and I do think it gets down to values in many ways. But, you know, the fact that we don't, you know, in a conversation like this, we don't have a lot of local community representatives. I appreciate the comments going up from Joe and Gail, but, you know, I'm working with local communities across all of sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm working, of course, on elephants. I've done that my entire career. And I think that we're going to completely miss the point if we just keep the focus constantly on there's some elephants here, we want them to be able to get there. We have to start working with governments on what their long-term plans are. And I'm afraid to say that I work with many of them, and they don't all have elephant conservation as their first thing. Many of them have human health, human education, you know, development needs. And I think we shouldn't, any of us, forget that Europe went through this, followed by North America. And what they did was they removed all of the dangerous wildlife, became very wealthy, and now they're rewilding. And, you know, I think we just have to be conscious that Africa may make that same decision. I have no idea which way it will go, but I think we'd all just be helped by thinking in a broader context of what these governments are up against, what they're trying to achieve for the people of their country and the wildlife of their country. Because I don't work with a single government that's not concerned also about its wildlife. So I just wanted to say that, Kirsten. I'm happy to continue discussing this with anybody that's interested, but I just, you know, felt that there was some missing perspective here that I wanted to add. And I'm not making any comment whatsoever on any of the techniques that have been mentioned for what do we do about too many elephants. As I said, there's more than enough out there on that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you very, very much. Very valuable perspective. Thank you. Grant, would you like to comment on what Holly's just said?
No, I think, Holly, you're very accurate, and I appreciate it. I think that it's more of a statement than a question to me. I think you're 100% correct. And we come back to what Sam had said. Yes, land use planning is vitally important, but somebody has to bite the bullet and somebody has to sign the agreement and pay the check. That's the bottom line. Everybody's standing around waiting for that to happen. And in the meantime, you know, people are suffering and elephants are dying or going to die. So that's as much as I can make a statement as well.
Thank you, Grant. Audrey, I see that you've been very busy answering questions in the background, and I was wondering whether you're feeling as if you're getting through all those questions, or whether you would still like, or if there's still people that haven't had their questions answered who would like to ask them directly to Audrey. How are you doing, Audrey?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, it's been fascinating seeing all the comments, etc. I see there's a lot of them, so I'm working my way through them slowly. I don't think I'm going to get through them all, so if anybody does want to ask here, that's great. And then maybe if you can provide them to me, then I'm very happy to go back and answer them by email, because I see there's a lot to unpack here, and not enough to say in a small little text box.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. Thank you for being for diligently going through them all. There were a lot of questions, lots of people very interested. I have a question here, and I'm wondering which one of you would like to answer it. It's by Zolani Mzamango. We were informed that carriage capacity, I think it's carrying capacity in South Africa has been exceeded. Is that correct?
I'll go, Grant, if you want, and then you can fill in the gaps if I've left anything out.
Yeah, I think maybe Sam Ferreira would like to answer that one as well.
I was actually just going to think about him as well.
I mean,
but go ahead. Audrey, you were going to start.
No, I think that's actually a much better option. Go ahead, Sam.
No, I can't exactly remember the question. I do think that the application of of some or other limiting potential is a very valid thing to do. Our challenge is that the way that we have been applying it in South Africa using the existing carrying capacity models, and that is largely because it's at least half of the decisions we're making is a value judgment. So that places at risk. You can more or less on the day, whichever way you get up, you decide you assign X amount of foliage to species X. And then when you now have another species that you introduce into a place, the whole dynamics change immediately. And that then puts us in difficult spots to defend why we want to do something if we have a desire to manage towards a specific envelope of numbers. Not just that, particularly with elephants, I mean, everybody that has got elephants on their properties will know the day that you start getting concerned about it, they've already changed a lot in that system. And if you're worried about change, not necessarily stopping them growing more is not necessarily going to stop the change right now. And that is because elephants, if you've gone and you've done an assessment of the browsing and the grazing capacity, which you normally do in the wet season or at the end of the wet season when you can identify grasses, but come by the end of the dry season, animals has eaten things. So that entire biomass has changed that's available out there. So there's these dynamics that I think we're not always careful on. So we should use estimates of things like what we think about carrying capacity and how much can be in a system as a guideline, not as a hard and fast fact that given that we realize that we've got these ecological systems that are chopping and changing every year from a dry to wet season, and then you get dry and wet cycles as well. So I hope that helps. Thanks for passing the buck, guys.
Go get your bottle of wine, Sam. Okay, Bruce, on to you.
Yeah, Bruce Page would probably be also good to answer that, I think.
Evening, Grant, Audrey. Grant, this one's for you. It's a very strange thing, because I think of all the animals in the world that are gentle and easy to live with, elephants are by far the easiest animal to live with. Throughout Africa, where they occur in reserves where they're not disturbed, there are many people that have them coming up to their houses. In Botswana and many parts of East Africa, as you will know, where there are undisturbed populations, you'll find herders with cattle moving, a few meters away from elephants. They're not normally aggressive animals. And so where you have conflict, we've been really remiss. We've done a lot of studying on how to prevent the conflict, but very little on what actually causes it. If you look at the recent, and this is where I'd like you to comment, if you look at the recent conflicts in South Africa, in every instance where elephants have broken out of a reserve, they've broken out of a reserve where they are highly disturbed. More and more, even in places like Kruger National Park, tourism itself is becoming a stress on elephants. In some of the smaller reserves, the intensity of just plain tourism on elephants is causing stress. But where in reserves, I won't mention them by name, but let's just say the reserves out of which elephants have broken out and then gone to kill people, all of those reserves also are very active game ranches where there's daily hunting. And, if a gun goes off in my neighborhood, I'm very aware of it. Elephants don't like you banging over their heads continuously. And when you do that, they'll move. And the thing is, once they become a little bit aggressive like that, you've got a big problem. And they break through a fence and, the people on the outside have the problem with them. I think you mentioned education that's needed. I think the education is from two sides. Not only the people that they come in contact with when they break out of reserves and where they cause problems with their crops, they need educating. But the people driving them towards the outside also need educating. And guys that write norms and standards. There's nothing in the norms and standards about annoying elephants and turning them into problem animals or, delinquent teenagers or whatever you want to call them. There's a big responsibility in keeping elephants, and we're failing on that as well, on all fronts, public, private, you name it. You might like to comment, Grant. And I think Audrey probably has some perspective on elephant stress as well. Maybe she'd also like to comment on it.
Yeah, Bruce, yeah, Audrey can take over. I think, again, that's a good statement, and I can't disagree with you completely. Definitely, we're causing the stress, and the retaliations are because of something that has happened in the past in all circumstances. So I'd welcome any other comments, but I think more it's a very good statement. There's nothing more than I can add to what you've said.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Bruce.
I
Thank you, Grant.
concur.
Oh, Audrey, you concur.
So I just wanted to say, I think Bruce raises an important point, because often we focus on human-elephant conflict outside of boundaries and borders when elephants break out. But actually, we are also increasingly seeing more conflict inside tourism areas. And that's because of, frankly, stupid things that people do, and whether that's tourists or guides or delivery vehicles, etc. Just because there's this perception that, I don't know, that these are Disney animals. I'm not sure what it is, and it is a growing problem. But also because simple things, there's no standardization within our reserves of, for example, fences and policy. So one reserve will allow elephants to come and drink from their swimming pool, and then another lodge won't. And this creates confusion, and you can't undo boundaries with elephants, and they don't know from one extreme to the next what is allowed and what is not allowed. And then that creates so-called problem elephants that then end up getting destroyed because of our basic mismanagement. So yeah, it is a big problem, and DCA animals are too quick to be labeled and dispatched. Thanks.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thank you, Audrey. I would like to just pop two last questions in, one for each of you, Grant and Audrey. Grant, there's a question, a very practical question from Gail Thompson. She asks, is the corridor, you showed that little video, is that corridor fenced on either side? How do you ensure that they use the corridor rather than walk up the bank and land up on the road?
The corridor is fenced on either side. They
Okay.
cannot get back on the road. And they have three options. They've got a bridge that was built in 1940 and discontinued. They've got the riverbed, and they've got a pathway. So it's impossible for them to get back on the road unless they break the fence, which they are finally trained. They've never broken out in, I think, 25 years. Yeah, 25 years.
Thanks, Grant. Audrey, a question that's just popped up by Rickard van der Westhuizen. If tourism and hunting are sources of stress, is chasing them with choppers to dart them at least once a year not also a stress?
Hi, Rickard. So I think in the paper that I did, we looked at that exclusively as part of my PhD. So we did measure the stress effect before, during, and after darting. And we actually saw that the effects of the darting were very short-lived. And so, yes, there is no doubt that there is a stress effect, but it depends on whether you're doing it on foot or from the vehicle, or from the helicopter. And in fact, they are responding to the platform, which is the helicopter itself. And as I said, in the 25 years of the reserve that's been going on the longest, we see that we could be contracepting elephants in the morning and having game drives with those same elephants that afternoon. So I think it's a matter of prioritizing what your objectives are here. And we're not going to tick all the boxes for everything, but if there is a will, there is a way, as they say. And I think, again, coming back to my apples with apples theory, what is the alternative? So if we're not going to be contracepting them every year, and you're going to adopt for a more lethal strategy like culling them every year, what do you think the consequences of culling them every year, and then dealing with the mop-up of those carcasses, etc., what are the effects of that going to have? So I think we've got to adopt the least harm principles here. And we've got to think about what we want in the long term. We've got 25 years worth of data and research on populations, as I say, from coast to coast. And that speaks for itself. And I don't know that other methodologies have ever had so much scrutiny applied to them. So, but I think, there has to be a compromise, and we need to see and what we are willing to risk and take in.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm going to subject you to one last question. There's a very enthusiastic question in the chat by, I think it's Katarina Hanekom. When will the vaccine be registered? She wants to know.
So that's Catherine Hanekom. Hi, Catherine.
Catherine.
So Catherine raises the point because the vaccine is currently produced by the University of Pretoria at their Ondersport lab, and it is under Section 21. And so the issue is the quantities. And so that is a question that will have to be addressed by the lab. But as far as I'm aware, that is not something that's going to happen soon, simply because of the volume that is required, because with registration comes commercialization of the product. And so my understanding is that that is not something that is feasible at this stage, but she's welcome to follow up with the lab.
Thank you, Audrey. Super. I think it's been a great evening, and I think time to gently close off. Grant, our other speakers had to leave right now, and I'd just like to say thank you very much, Audrey, for being here with us and for presenting your very amazing and passionate work that you have shared so wonderfully with us. Thank you. And thank you to the audience and to the Unlocking Nature community and to the team who've put it together. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.